Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session, where we'll talk about unlocking identity insights to power the digital customer experience. Today, we'll look at why collecting customer data is getting harder, the types of data that you need to create actionable insights, and show you an example of how CIAM and Okta have teamed up to help you collect consented customer data in real time and how that insight powers the customer experience. Before we introduce ourselves and get into the content, this is our safe harbor slide since this presentation may have some forward-looking statements. And with that, let's meet your speakers today. So, hey everyone, I'm Matt Denick, Senior Director of Product Marketing for the Okta Customer Identity Cloud. And let me introduce Jake.
Hey everyone, I'm Jake Nguerta from the CIAM Partnerships team, where we have over 1,300 integrations within our CDP, and I'm here to tell you that the Okta Auth0 integration is the best of the bunch.
So first, let's start off with why. For marketers, everything starts with the customer, but preferences, buying behaviors, and even customer identities are all tied up in a lot of dirty, illegitimate data from many disparate channels and platforms. And it's not enough that the organization simply has all of this information somewhere. The data needs to be available to all of the right processes at the right time in order to support privacy by respecting personalization in marketing. This personalization can be characterized as people-based marketing. And all of this is becoming more and more challenging to both the properties you own and within the advertising ecosystem. But Jake, what exactly is people-based marketing?
So people-based marketing is a concept that came out better part of 10 years ago, and it was pushed largely by some of the closed-wall social networks, because it was a big differentiator between the way that we used to buy media, which was really buying large audiences, think men 18 to 34, and then it was a move to actually buying Matt and actually having a conversation with that one individual, showing them the best ad at the best time. It's a concept that actually worked really well. It took a while for the industry to get to a place where they were doing it well, and some of the things that you might think of would be the retargeting where that ad followed you around. But as we got better and better at it, it was the email coming through at the right time. It was the right ad coming through with the creative that made the most sense to you. And this was something that was all based on anonymous identifiers. So think about the cookie or mobile identifiers. And honestly, it was working doing this to a large extent. But then the anonymous identifiers, they came to, let's call it end of life. They're coming to end of life right now. The reasons for this, and we've got them in good, bad, and ugly. One, while it worked, it was anonymous, which was good, and it was quite a low barrier of entry. There were really a lot of ad tech popped up over 10 years that could provide a really good experience and really good options for advertisers. The reality was it was unaccountable. Because anonymity meant that things like third-party data, for instance, you didn't know where it was coming from. You didn't know that it was Matt in market. You knew, in fact, that it was a string of numbers and letters, which was great for providing anonymity, not so good for making sure that you're really getting what you paid for. If you bought an auto intender, it was a lot of trust from that third-party data that you were actually getting an auto intender. It was particularly inefficient. So part of the system that worked relied on a series of technology to make sure you were getting the right impression at the right time. And there was one study done that actually showed that only 30 pence on the pound got through from the advertiser to the publisher in the end. So there was a lot of wastage within this ad tech that meant it wasn't good for publishers, and it probably wasn't great for advertisers in the end. Okay, so regardless of all this, though, there was some ugly side to anonymous tracking. And one of those was regulatory resistance. The risk to doing this became far too much for advertisers at the point where GDPR and CCPA came into play. There are now 14 different other forms of legislation around the globe that look much the same as this. And it really means that there's no safe way of anonymously tracking people. It was also terribly prone to fraud. A lot of the impressions that you were getting, you didn't even know if they were real people. They might be bots, it might be a click farm, etc. Anonymity didn't actually help us out there. We didn't know we were sending this to the right person. And finally, and this is kind of a curious one, in that when people did opt out, when people went to the bottom of the browser and said, don't track me, there was no way of proving that you weren't tracking someone because they were just a cookie. So there was no real course of action for them if they said, I think I'm still being tracked. So that's what we call the anonymous consent paradox. We can't stop tracking you because we don't really know who you are. All this, however, was, this is largely academic at this point. And the reason it's academic is because The different issues that have been impacting these anonymous signals have already taken place right now. If we look at that top line there, we have the time that the average person in the US is spending on different addressable devices. This is where our advertising dollars are going. This is where our eyeballs are spending their time. If you look at what was happening back in 2014, which was really about as good as it ever got for anonymous tracking, this was a time where advertisers thought they'd be able to get a full view over the entire advertising experience and communication path for any one of their potential customers, all the way to the point of transaction. At this point, we had about 75% of everything was available to advertisers. We could track most of what was happening on the internet. We could see when people were converting on websites, and then to an extent, this was starting to happen in stores. But funnily enough, the reverse happened to this, this holy grail of knowing everything that the consumer was doing went backwards. It went backwards partly because the closed walled gardens stopped showing what was happening within their environments. It also stopped happening because we had different action by the browsers and by the tech providers, Apple in particular, who made it very, very hard to use anonymous identifiers across their app interface through something called app tracking transparency. Came through about a year or so ago. This killed about 80% of the signals that were coming from apps, for instance. We've also got Safari, which make it incredibly hard to track at this point. They've chosen to lead with a privacy-first marketing position, and they're backing it up by making it very hard to do this anonymous tracking. So if we go through to where we'll be next year, and this is after Google's Chrome stops allowing tracking, we're going to get the exact reverse. We're going to have roughly 75% of signal is unavailable. This means that everything we were doing in people-based marketing is no longer relevant. We're no longer that critical mass where we can actually do the right ad at the right time to the right person based on anonymous identifiers. We need to find another way.
Yeah, and I think it's a really good point, right? Because it really comes down to consent, because it's important to note that obtaining that consent doesn't mean the death of personalization, right? In fact, if we look at the stat, 71% of consumers expect personalization, right? And consumers are willing to provide their data and their consent for it being used if there's value in that exchange, right? So it's more convenient, it's helpful, it provides more contextualized interaction. And even better news for marketers is that 78% of consumers are more likely to make a repeat purchase from companies that personalize. So take the example of your favorite retailer where you've recently purchased some goods, and now they are now able to offer you additional items that could be purchased that other folks that are like you have purchased as well. And that personalized recommendations are really where that consent comes from. Creating that value exchange, however, is not easy, and there's many problems that exist in the underlying collection of that data today. The biggest challenge is that the understanding of customers through data is really hard. And this is primarily driven by data fragmentation, if you think about where all of these data systems are stored. In fact, 58% of marketers say that leveraging an integrated customer data set is a huge challenge for them. As more channels and systems are added, more customer data is collected and distributed across these silos. And even when data is aggregated with a master data management platform or even a customer data platform like CIAM, it can be untrustworthy since these systems do not verify the legitimacy of previously collected data. Because data is not verified, marketers don't know if they're even marketing to a real person. In fact, 37% of them are not sure how many of their database contacts are even real in the first place. They also don't know if this data is up to date. All this bad data leads to poor decision making that results in wasted marketing spend and other operational inefficiencies, as well as security deficits as well. On average, poor data quality can cost an organization close to $13 million a year. And going back to privacy, when data is aggregated across multiple silos, more often than not, it's missing proper consent. And in fact, 1 in 5 marketers cite that privacy compliance is really their main concern. So we've looked at a few of the challenges in how you build consent to use customer data. Now let's talk about the data that you actually need to build the best customer experiences. The best customer experiences depend on trusted, unified, and consented data. And being able to act on accurate, up-to-date customer data in real time is the only way to support privacy-respecting and data-driven automated personalization. When data is outdated or collected without consent, the trust and the customer experience of that personalization falls apart. And Jake, as you and I both know, the challenge certainly is not for a lack of data, but let's talk about that a little more.
Yeah, absolutely, Matt. So, yeah, the problem is no longer a lack of data. I don't know if everyone remembers, but around 2015, this is when big data was going to solve all of our problems. And this is pretty much where we've stripped this little cartoon from. Um, we got to a place, and it was really because the clouds allowed us to store in data lakes a lot of data much more cheaply than we did previously, and we were encouraged to do so by some of the providers for obvious reasons. This meant that we got a lot of data, as did all of our different vendors. But the issue here is never going to be about the amount of data. This is good. We have the data. Unfortunately, though, it's siloed in a lot of different places. So right now we have them sitting in point of sale systems in bricks and mortar stores. We have it in mobile apps, in marketing clouds. We have a lot sitting in those data lakes that are, we're still trying to work out exactly what to do with. As a matter of fact, for most enterprise customers, their customer data is stored in over 120 disparate places. So this is really where a CDP comes in. And if we look at this next slide here, where we can talk about the way that a customer data platform helps transition this messy data in all these disparate places first into an individual and then into audiences that can be used through any marketing channel and even in call centers and these sorts of things. So what you're looking at here is really what a CDP does, and all CDPs do largely the same thing. The first thing is to create the data layer. This means just vacuuming up all the data from all different places. Some people are already doing this to an extent with data lakes and MDM and other ways. The next thing to do is to actually map that all together to make sure that all the data is speaking the same language, something else that CDPs help with. Then it's to resolve that into a single identity. So if you've got all these different disparate data spots, you need to be able to make sure that you know what Matt's doing when he receives an email, when he clicks on a link that's been sent to him via a text message, and all sorts of things. When he rings into a call center, all this information needs to be brought into one place where we really know that this is Matt. At that point, we can pair Matt up to people that are similar than it. We can start to do what you would do in a DMP, back in the day when we were doing things with anonymous identifiers. And you'd say that Matt is a high value customer that has not been back to the website in 6 months. So we probably need to start sending him something to encourage him to come back. Maybe it's an email, maybe it's direct mail. All of these things become available to you in that number 4, the activation. And I think we all know there's a myriad of ways of sending this out right now. But the most important thing you can do, and the area that actually becomes more difficult than we want to admit, is resolve that identity. If you can imagine the challenges that come along with Matt using a different email address here, using his wife's email address there, etc., but we need to know who it is. The identity resolution is actually the real reason that Okta, Ortho, and Telium have come together to create this connector.
Yeah, and to your point, Jake, I think customer identity really plays a critical role as that source, that trusted data source, right? To ensure that the profile that's within the CDP and that's created from aggregating existing data from various sources, that it stays both up to date as well as consent forward. So if we go from left to right, from the account creation to becoming a paying customer in this diagram, at the account creation and sign up phase, this is really the first point of identity resolution, right? Where we can uniquely collect customer and user attributes as well as consent from the user. And when you implement social sign-in, not only does it make it easier for those customers to log in, it makes the resolution of those profiles even easier, as we can resolve that customer's profile to an identity provider like Google or GitHub to validate and enrich that user's profile even further. At the email verification phase, we can validate if the user is actually who they say they are, right? That example of the user email address, and using aliases to really recommend that account and account linking scenarios. If we look at consent and acknowledgement, the Okta Customer Identity Cloud solution captures consent as well as acknowledgement during both the account creation and sign-on phases. So this provides further resolution, identification resolution, especially in situations where social login has been implemented. So we can resolve against that identity provider. With progressive profiling scenarios, this provides a way to build trust further with your customers and doing this over time. And the way that you do this is by asking a series of personalized questions over time that are more likely to get trusted responses. The fifth phase here is actually feeding a customer data platform like Telium. And all of this customer identity data is updated in real time to your CDP, giving you actionable insights on your customers for better targeting, personalized marketing. And really, this gives your customers continuous value as well as their consent. And with better data and the consent to use that data, you get better insights, which translates into dollars effectively for more meaningful interactions with your customers. So let's talk about some of the outcomes of integrating customer identity and customer data platforms together. Now that we understand a little bit more about customer data platforms like Telium and how Okta's customer identity cloud helps enrich customer profiles through trusted data sources, let's go through some of these key use cases that this integration solves. So we'll look at anonymous to known, profile enrichment, and actionable insights. First, how do we take an individual from not knowing anything about them to building up their known profile, especially as we move away from third-party cookies? It starts by collecting consented data and using trusted signals like the unique identifiers that user provides at the account creation phase, the locales, devices, IP addresses the user is logging in from, their verified identifiers such as email and even phone number, and even during those authentication challenges. We can also resolve against the attributes that are received from an identity provider such as Google, the first name, the last name, picture, location, etc., and data that's collected from questions that we asked at subsequent logins through progressive profiling. Do you have any thoughts on that, Jake, in terms of the additional data that we could provide there?
Yeah, actually, funnily enough, Matt, anonymous to known is one of the biggest challenges for a CDP to overcome, especially when you compare it to what we could do with DMPs and retargeters in the past. The time that you're least likely to have an identity provided to you, like an email address or something like that, is right at the start of a retail journey. So if someone comes to the website, it's less likely that they've signed in, for instance. And in this case, we really need to do what we can to find out who this person is if we want to be able to do things like remarket via email, if we want to know even if they're interested in a category page, etc. This is really a challenge for CDPs because we did rely on anonymous identifiers as an industry previously. Now, this is a great place for the Okta Telium integration to start solving this problem. And we see that this can immediately help things like cart abandonment, etc. Real marketing metrics can be resolved by using Okta and Telium together to replicate what we used to do in DMPs.
Yeah, that's an interesting point as well. We'll get into a bit of a demonstration of that. But now that we know a little bit more about the user, how do we further enrich their profiles, right? This is a really important part as well. And customer identity provides a single interface for customers to input their consented data directly, from simply updating their preferences and contact details to other non-disruptive methods such as social connections that we walk through and even progressive profiling. And when you leverage the extensibility of the Okta platform, global consent partners can easily be integrated and presented updated terms of service that can be managed and updated using the customer's consent if new data points are collected along that journey. And just to touch on social connections again, things like signing with Google, Facebook, Apple, GitHub, etc., provide a very low friction way of collecting consented data. And we can also use this data to link to the user's profile together so that if something changes with the identity provider, that it's automatically updated in the Telium CDP.
Yeah, absolutely. So from a CDP perspective, accurate and rich data is the most important thing that we can get. And often we find that it's not too hard, to get an email address or something like that, and we'll use this to resolve an identity. But if we can find out more data points through integrations like this one, say we can find out a number, that might be all we know about someone that's been to a call center briefly. We can use that to stitch together that identity in a way that really helps us understand that Matt is Matt, not two separate people. Now, the other thing that we can do, and this is really much harder for a CDP to get their hands on, is get something that adds more color. So, for instance, if you can let me know that you're a HubSpot user, as we can through this integration, that tells me something really special about you that doesn't organically come through a normal digital experience, for instance, or even a call center. This allows us to add a bit of psychographic information and really get those audiences targeted down to the specific person we want to be talking to.
Yeah, and I think that's a really great example, Jake, of turning insight into action, right? And I think these insights can also help you as marketers identify points of friction, right, across both the login and the registration phase. These can come in the form of abandoned signups and sign-ins, authentication failures, and really password reset completions as well. And even more, I think if we look at how and why folks might even be calling into your call center or your support teams or help desk, There's a really great example here from Future 8 Technologies where authentication accounts for on average 40% of help desk costs. This is customers that are waiting on hold to reset their password or otherwise having trouble logging into their existing accounts. And when customers are waiting on hold with your help desk, not only does that frustrate the customer and inflate your overall support costs, it also means that they're not interacting with your brand or purchasing goods. For example, when Dick's Sporting Goods started working with Okta, they wanted to unify their online properties and make the online experience as easy as walking from department to department in their store. And working with Okta to streamline authentication, they did this across their experiences. And they noticed that it increased the number of customers who sign into Dick's Sporting Goods platforms by 4.8% year over year. Dick's also saw a decrease in overall customer support complaints and folks that were actually calling into customer support. This resulted in an increase in the overall percentage of orders placed from users that were actually signed in versus as a guest checkout. So Jake, do you have an example of how we've done this and how department to department sort of experience can apply to CDPs in general?
Yeah, so with customers like Dick's Sporting Goods, their concept that everyone should be able to walk around their digital properties and everything else, like they're walking from department to department within the department store, that's a great one for CDPs in general. So the way that a CDP can facilitate the customer journey is really department to department. So if we think about this one, if you ring up because you've got a question, that person should be able to immediately see what is sitting in your cart. If you're an online shopper. If you have a question about a delivery that hasn't come through, the person at the call center should know immediately what it is that you're talking about. These are things that traditionally we've done through a number of checks, a number of please tell me your name, your email, the things that really add friction to that journey and stop it being a department to department sort of experience. Using a CDP and using that right identity resolution, we can have someone come, recognize their number, and immediately tell the associate that's working with them exactly what they've done in the past and what they're looking to do right now. So conceptually, we've touched on a number of points here. What we'd like to do is give you an idea of what it looks like when the rubber hits the road. What does it really look like when you're in the interface and you're trying to use this Okta information along with the Telium customer data platform? Okay, so what we're looking at here is the Telium interface. This is the Telium Customer Data Hub. We're going to find a new data source, which is the way that we consider the Okta integration. And then we're finding Okta Ortho here. We're giving it a name. This is all very simple and essentially wizard-based. If you remember that term from back in the 90s, we're finding the attributes that we want to be associated here, the things that we want to pull across from Okta, and doing some very basic mapping. Really, it's just choosing the information that you want to get out of the connector. We're following some install prompts that are relatively straightforward. And at this point, we're going to be given a data source key. And really, a lot of what we need to do within the Telium Customer Data Hub is finished at this point. And Matt, if you want to take us through what happens on your side.
Yeah, now we're going to go into the Okta Customer Identity Cloud dashboard, and we're going to be going in to set up and configure the Telium integration to start collecting customer identity attributes. We'll use this integration quickly in showing actions and our actions capability. Actions are really the cornerstone of the Customer Identity Cloud's extensibility capability. So here, we'll add the Telium integration at the login phase by dragging and dropping the pre-built integration inside of the actions preview and using the actions flow editor. What we're going to be doing as well is configure this by adding the data source ID as well as the Telium trace ID, which is really going to allow us to verify that the integration is working properly. We'll now go back and actually run the trace on the data source ID, and we'll see that all of the data that's being collected from the user's login, the user's email address, their phone number, their IP address, their city, their first name, their last name, and all of this is being added in real time at login to the Telium CDP. So we've stitched together the profiles and enhanced the user attributes using these customer provided attributes. And the visitor's profile is even further enhanced thanks to this integration.
Okay, so that's a 2-minute explanation of how the integration works, and it really is that simple. But if you leave here today with nothing else, the two main takeaways are: one, people-based marketing works. We just need to transition to a new way of doing it. No more anonymous tracking. Consented PII is the superior substitute, but only if you have accurate and readily available customer data. Anyone using Okta for customer identity should take this rich data straight away and put it into your CDP. If that CDP happens to be Telium, then you just saw a great example of how you can do this right now. So on behalf of Matt and myself, I'd like to thank everyone for watching this presentation. And if you have any further questions about how Okta and Telium work together, please feel free to reach out to Matt or myself on the emails you see on the screen. Thanks very much.